Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
we chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and the great human adventure all through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, your producer and co-host. Hey, we've got a great show for you today. Enneagram Type 3, Joe Nucci. He's a psychotherapist and one of the clearest translators of mental health language on the internet today. If you've ever heard words like trauma, gaslighting, or narcissist getting tossed around and thought, wait a minute, are we using that term right? Joe's the guy who brings nuance without the jargon. His brand new book, Babble, came out in September, and he's also launching a Luminary original show, Therapy versus the World, where he takes deeper dives into all of this. We're so happy to have Joe on the show. We cover a lot of ground today. We go deep into the Enneagram, of course, as well. So glad that you're here. Hey, that's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, without any further ado, here is the man of the hour, Ian Crum.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We are so delighted that you're here. Today's conversation is going to be rich. And you are going to want to sit down, tune in, because we're going to be talking about some things that I think are super important. Our guest today is Joe Nucci. As Anthony mentioned, he is an Enneagram 3. He is the author of the new book, Babble. And the reason I responded positively when his publicist reached out and said, hey, do you want to have Joe on the show, is because I think Joe and I share a lot of common concerns about, as therapists, about kind of the sloppy misapplication of therapeutic terms in the culture. And anyway, Joe, welcome to the show, you Enneagram 3.
Thanks so much for having me. I have to say, I'm not actually familiar with you two as much as I'd like to be. What types are you?
4s.
We're both 4s.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get deep then.
We can do that. Careful. So, Joe, your experience with the Enneagram. I know there's a chapter in the book about personality typologies or things of the kind. What is your experience with it? And what was your reaction when you realized or came to discover you were a 3?
All right. I'll answer this in 3 parts. The first part is my general stance on personality tests or frameworks is a lot of people write them off if they're not, like evidence-based or, if they're not very scientific. But I actually think that people that do that, these people are going to a restaurant and criticizing the menu for not being a cookbook. Like, it's not what these things are for. Like, they're not meant to really objectively and accurately describe someone and all of their nuances. They're actually meant to reduce them down to simpler components so we can have a shorthand. And I think the conversation we just had a second ago is a perfect example of that. You said 4. I have a general understanding of what you mean. And then I crack a joke. And then you and I are more connected. We're on the same page about so much. And so that's why I really love the Enneagram. I was initially convinced I was a 7. I learned the Enneagram through a mentor of mine when I was 23 years old, maybe 23 or 24. And I was completely convinced I was a 7. I think a few different things happened along the way. I think I did get diagnosed with ADHD. And so I think getting on the right medication and I think learning those executive functioning skills helped. And those could be 7-like, arguably. But if you ask people who've known me all my life, who are familiar with the Enneagram, who have learned it, they would have told you that I was a 3 all along. And I think that it's just part of that self-awareness. Us 3s, we're in that shame triad. And shame is really hard to detect within yourself in terms of how it drives your behavior. And when I started to arrive at some conclusions that I might be a 3, my first instinct was I should continue to identify as a 7 because that's a much better look, which is pretty much all the confirmation anyone needed that I was in fact a 3, the achiever, the performer.
Yeah, that is a fairly well-rehearsed script you're describing. So how has and I agree with you, by the way, I think in the last 10 years since The Road Back to You came out and subsequent books, I started to meet people that I would characterize as being frothy mouthed about the Enneagram. They're like, this explains everything. And I'm the one who is always trying to talk people off the ledge, right? Yep. Like I would be the one who's like, maybe I'm putting myself out of a job here, but we're talking about low definition pictures of the interior architecture, if you will, of different types of personalities, but they are approximations. They are not in any way, shape, or form. These are not going to show up on your MRI. Okay.
Right.
However, like all models, the question isn't, is it absolutely true? The question is for me is it true enough? So for me, the Enneagram is useful because it's approximately true about, constellations of behaviors, ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving that subsets of the population seem to exhibit over time. And so we should just take it seriously and have a conversation about it. That's how I just approach it with a much more kind of not crypto-religious kind of addiction to the system itself, which I oftentimes see in people that makes me tense.
Yeah, I understand. I definitely think I had a phase where I was a bit of an Enneagram evangelist. But maybe like a year or two, after discovering it, I started sinking my teeth into, the 5-factor model, which is a framework of personality that I really adore. And so I'm much more balanced with it today. I think my theory as to why the Enneagram might kind of have that effect on people like you're describing is the writing is just so beautiful. Whenever you go and read, and there's obviously, so many different kind of books and texts out there, but I often find the writing just very compelling in a way that a lot of psychology writing doesn't seem to capture, because a lot of psychology writing can be a little, clinical and sanitized. And I think that the way it makes room for the whole experience of a person is often why so many people love it and why so many people resonate with it.
Well, and not to mention the fact that these books aren't being peer reviewed, right? So you're not looking for absolute precise language. You have a little bit more poetic license to work with, and you can also write anecdotally. It's interesting. We had a research psychologist on the show years ago. Do you remember this guy, Anthony? It was maybe Richard Beck, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yes.
He said that he was as a research psychologist, he was super skeptical of the Enneagram, but his wife got into it. And he said, you know what? I saw it change her life, and the way that her work with the Enneagram was transformative. And he said, and then I realized, anecdotal evidence is still evidence. You may not be able to come up, applies the same kind of rigorous analysis, statistically about things like you might be able to do with the factor, the 5-factor. But what I saw was genuine life change in the right direction as a result of them working with it. And I was satisfied with that as making it a useful tool.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's been studied. If it hasn't, it should. But I would guess that there is some scientific validity in the assertion that learning the framework, like learning the 9 types, how they interact, all the different nuances, I think it increases empathy for people who are different from you. I've seen this in my practice. I've seen it in my dating life and friendships, even understanding my mom. My mom is a pretty textbook 6. And I have these memories of, when I first went away to school in college, she'd call me up on a weekend night, and the first thing out of her mouth would be something like, "Was everything okay over there?" And that would really freak me out, because even though, I identify as a 3, I was always, very, and I guess 3s and 7s do have this in common, but, we're generally pretty positive, and so for that question always bothered me from my mom, because it was like, why would you put that in my space? Why would you even introduce the idea that something might not be okay? And I was always so envious of, friends, parents whose moms seemed lighter, and all moms worry to a certain extent. But for my mom being a 6, I really think that's how she shows love. it's through concern for especially for, kind of cultivating that security and that continuity. And, it's, what they say about sixes, it's a good thing that somebody's worried about that because they're just keeping the rest of us together.
Yeah. Well, there's some truth to that for sure. Where do you see that in your experience where using the Enneagram as a tool of personal transformation goes off the rails?
I think, like we've talked about, any time that people get a little too dogmatic with it, I think that can be tenuous. I think that one way that I use it in my practice, if the patient is Enneagram fluent, or I think that learning personality frameworks will be helpful to whatever we're working on, is I like to encourage them. I'd be curious to know what you two think about this. I'd really like to encourage them to not talk about it of it's like, I am a 3 or I am a 7. It's more like, I have a lot of 3-ness. I have a lot of 7-ness. Because one way that I think it can maybe, initially help people's self-development, but then quickly arrest it, is when they get too locked in to what they believe their type to be. I don't resonate with the 8 very much, just as an example. And I certainly have some 8 in me when I don't want to be vulnerable, when I'm feeling like scared, like when I'm feeling out of control. And so even though it may not be the type that I resonate with, it was still so valuable for me to learn about, not just so I can understand the 8s in my life, but so when I'm in situations and I'm kind of being, tested like an 8 might, there's an opportunity for me to kind of step into it with a little bit of integrity. So I think there's that. I also think that, not always just, this is like the clinician coming out in me, but sometimes because the Enneagram is so often, adored in religious communities and spiritual communities and kind of self-help circles, that sometimes I think that there's a little bit of a blurriness between like, well, is this, an unhealthy iteration of a type on the Enneagram? Or is this like psychopathology? Like, is this, should we actually should this person be actually getting some professional help here? And I think that obviously it completely depends on the context, but I have seen people, I think, suffer unnecessarily for longer than they need to, because, this is their type, this is their, their vibe. And then, someone like me comes along and they're like, well, that's actually like, what you're describing is like symptoms of OCD or something like that. It's like, have you ever talked to somebody about that? And so I think that, but that's not unique to the Enneagram. I think that's really unique to anything in the self-help space, even, kind of clinically valid frameworks as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, it kind of goes in both directions, right? Because on the one hand, someone may come and say, well, I'm pretty OCD. Right. And I'll say, well, tell me what you mean by that. And they'll actually just describe an Enneagram 1. There's no ritual. There's no hand washing. There's no, double checking the fridge. Did I close the door on the fridge? Did I turn off the stove? I mean, all the other. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, wait a second. Please don't flatter yourself. You do not have OCD. You're just an Enneagram 1. Right. On the other hand, I may have someone who come to me who says I'm an Enneagram 1, and they actually describe someone that has met the criteria for OCD, right? And it's like, or OCPD actually. And so it's like, oh, no, actually that's not the problem, right? So the key here, right, is discernment, and also making sure that you're doing the discernment with people who sort of understand both spaces, right? Like clinically understand both spaces, which kind of leads me to something that you're kind of hot on. I haven't had a chance to read Babble, but I've done some research on the book and on you. And I know that you have a deep concern about the way that clinical language terminology shows up on social media, in the self-help space, and how people are taking important words, right, in that space and misapplying them in ways that are really hurtful or damaging to people. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, it's not what I necessarily expected to be the spokesperson for. Not that I'm the only one making content about this or speaking out about this, but, in grad school, we were introduced to this, you can almost think of it as like a philosophical debate in the field, which is, to what extent should you pathologize everyday life? To what extent should you use medical terminology, mental health terminology to describe what are normal human struggles? And when I started getting serious about creating content, I started absorbing more content, and I was truthfully shocked to see how many licensed professionals like myself were making videos that would say something like, did you know that your entire personality is literally just a trauma response? And I remember thinking, I was like, well, first of all, that is not what the literature on personality says. Like taking Enneagram out of it for a second, like that's just not what the Big Five says. That's not what like any of these frameworks, purport. And secondly, like what a sad, cynical story to tell about like the human experience. We also know, and this is an evidence-based assertion, that we are equally impacted, if not more so, by the positive things that happen to us. How, people will, let's say you're like a loner at school or you're bullied at school, but then, one teacher or one person is really nice to you about one thing. People will take that positive experience and run with it and develop a whole personality and identity and like value system with it. It's actually a lot more impactful, I would say, than like than the traumas that can typically happen depending on how you define trauma, of course. And so I think that the reason why I proliferated on social media is, and this may be a little cynical, but I think as a 3, it is my duty to call it out when I see it. But it's giving capitalism, it's giving like mental health industrial complex. Like the people who are really served by this narrative are therapists or people who have a course to sell you. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to, be, adept at marketing and to kind of get your message out there in a strategic way. But I don't think it's okay to convince people that something is uniquely wrong with them when their struggle is probably normative. I also don't think it's okay to pretend that therapy is the answer for everything. One of the reasons why I love personality frameworks like the Enneagram is a lot of times what I'm doing in practice, if it's not like, a clinical like mental health disorder kind of a matter, is I'm helping people just cultivate that self-awareness and learn about themselves and learn about, there are great advantages to being a 3. Clearly there's some downsides that you need to be responsible for. Same thing for being a 4 or a 7, or, it doesn't really matter what your type is. And so I find that normalizing, it's the intervention is called normalization. Like when you normalize things for the person in front of you, that can often be more healing. And you just have to like wonder out loud, right? Like we've never branded mental health like we do today. We've never invested so much money in it. There's never been so many startups looking at it. I mean, do you two feel like we're just drowning in mental health? Like, it doesn't really like seem like, that's how where the culture is. And of course, there's more than one reason for that. But I think that the last thing I'll say on this little rant is I think that the reason why, the typical person gravitates towards the therapy speak, instead of saying like, oh, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, they'll say, I'm OCD, instead of saying, I'm fun loving and scattered and versatile, they'll say like, oh, I'm ADHD, right? I think the reason why is because we all feel, we all have this desperate need to feel seen and known and understood. And I think people turn to the field of psychology and mental health specifically as a way to just to carry a little bit of authority, So if I tell you about how I dated, someone who is just a selfish jerk, and they really didn't treat me well, you might show me like, a modicum of sympathy, but it's kind of like, I don't know, we all have, have rough relationships in our past. Most of us do anyways. But if I tell you, it's like my ex was a narcissist. It's like, it's immediately, it's like, oh, like, like I even feel that as I speak it to you. And so the irony though, is that as these words and terms become more popularized, I think these terms are actually carrying less weight than they really deserve. And the truth is that surviving a relationship with a true narcissist is very different from being with someone who's immature or selfish, or who in a breakup got a little grandiose, which I think lots of people do in breakups. I think that's a completely normal reaction.
So, I think what we're describing here is what happens when diagnoses or mental health conditions start to be used as adjectives in everyday conversation, right? And so, it actually does drive me crazy. So I'm not on social media, right? Personally, I don't have it on my phone. I don't watch it. It makes me depressed. So it really does affect my mental health. So I don't look at it.
I understand.
But, and just even in everyday conversation, someone's like, well, my husband was a narcissist, and I'm like, actually describe him to me. And they'll describe this person. I'll go, Actually, I don't mean to tell you this. I don't think your husband's a narcissist. It sounds to me like your husband is just a guy who's overly self-focused and is, maybe we could say that if he was to take an MMPI, he would be elevated on the narcissistic scale. But frankly, he probably doesn't meet the criteria for that. Don't go around calling him that. That's not what that guy is. He's just maybe a very, overly self-referential person that is, a pain in the ass, right?
Right.
Same thing with OCD, right? Like I'm very neat, I'm very organized. Oh, I'm OCD. But now it's an adjective.
Right.
And you've actually taken the gravity out of that idea of OCD or OCPD. And same thing. And I'll say one last thing while I'm ranting. All right. So when I was in graduate school, one of the things I started to learn was that there are fads in the world of psychotherapy, right? And we go on these sort of diagnostic runs, right? Like, so when I was in graduate school, for some reason at that time, at least in Denver, everybody was talking about clients with multiple personality disorder, right? Now, for those who don't know what that is, dissociative identity disorder, that is in such an insanely rare condition. And yet, every therapist I knew, I got someone with NPD. And then, then after that, we went through a long phase of everyone had bipolar 2 disorder. And then there was a long phase of, and then PTSD, right? And it's like, people would sometimes describe clients that they said had PTSD. And I'm like, I actually don't think they do. I think they've had a really bad experience, but I'm not convinced that they actually meet the criteria for that. And so that would drive me crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's also one of the reasons I started speaking out about it too is, it drives me crazy, in the sense that, I'm someone who's trained and went to school and now we're kind of surrounded, or at least I feel surrounded in a culture where, everyone who has, like a microphone and a light will get on to talk about, ADHD or trauma or these different topics. But for me, it's less about this like finger wagging, like, that's not the correct operational definition. And like, you should listen to, the credentialed experts. It's more the way people seem to be using it. And they seem to be unaware that they're using it this way a lot of the time is they're using it as a way to avoid hard conversations, to avoid deeper intimacy with people. So like, a basic example might be, someone saying like, well, you need to respect my boundaries. You need to respect my boundaries. And it's kind of like, well, boundaries are actually like, it's okay to talk about boundaries and to negotiate them. And maybe your preference, right, isn't actually going to work for someone else. And that's part of intimacy with someone. And it's really tough. It's really tricky. Like, I'm not saying it's going to feel good all the time. I'm not saying you're going to get what you want all the time, but it does seem to me that a lot of people use these terms and frameworks as a way to prioritize this sort of profound psychological comfort that I'm not sure, that I know for a fact will not carry them throughout the different storms of their life. Just as a therapist, I've seen that. I've also experienced that personally. And so again, when that is how the system is set up, you have to ask yourself, well, who is benefiting from this idea that, you deserve to kind of exist in an emotionally safe bubble all the time, and anyone who doesn't respect that, is a grandiose narcissist out to get you. I don't think the patient's benefiting from it, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Yeah. I was just thinking when you're saying that, even if someone does have narcissistic tendencies or OCD, or they're obsessive or they're compulsive, there's a spectrum anyway, right? But right. The tendency, what I'm hearing you saying is we just write people off by labeling them, and then, I'm off into the sunset and don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it's also that, Anthony, I think that it indicates a kind of relational laziness. Mm-hmm. If I can just smack a label on this, it's just a lazy way of saying I've got it all figured out. In the same way you could do with an Enneagram type, right? Sure. Just an 8. And I'm like, that's just lazy. That is not actually true.
Totally. Well, and some of my favorite writing on the Enneagram is, and it's in like what's his name, like Don Risso's book, where it talks about the interactions between the types and like the strengths of a relationship versus like the downsides to the relationship. But more than that, in the downside section, it's not just this is where you'll fail. It's like this is what you need to look out for. So I'm thinking about as a 3, when I've dated other 3s in the past, and we have to make a real effort to talk about the hard things. It's so easy for us to just kind of, reframe it. Same thing when I've dated sevens in my past. It's extraordinarily tempting, to just kind of, crack a joke or, just kind of like be like very practical about it without slowing down and actually doing that relational work. And in the moment you can feel very like, emotionally superior and relationally superior, but you always have to pay the price later. And for me, that's been a lesson worth learning, because it's only led to, I think wiser decisions and more, meaningful, more, what would I call it? More worthwhile relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you as an Enneagram 3, and you've worked with the Enneagram for a good long while. How has it helped you develop into a healthier version of yourself?
I mean, there's so much that I could say here. The first thing that comes to mind is, I've only been a content creator for like 2.5 years, plus or minus. And when I first started posting videos, like anybody who goes viral, you get some trolls, you get some hate. And that was really, really hard for me at the beginning. I mean, you're speaking to me 2.5 years in, so actually I have a very kind of a sober and balanced approach to all of that. I'm more kind of like, thank you for the engagement. Out of all the people you would pay attention to, thank you for choosing me. That's what you need in the game of the algorithm. But at the beginning, it was very, very difficult. I mean, I owe some of my close friends and loved ones like a muffin basket or something, because I remember there was like the first month or two there when I decided to take it seriously. I would call them like in the middle of the day, like almost every day, being like, can you believe what this person said? Like, can you believe what they think? Can you believe how they're misconstruing it? And in a way, it was such a good challenge for me, because I think that a lot of people, whether you're a 3 or not, don't like criticism. They don't tend to enjoy it. Whether the criticism is valid or not is completely beside the point. It just doesn't feel very good. And I'm actually very like thankful for the experience, because I do think over time, as I got more balanced with it and maybe even a little bit desensitized to like, my feelings about maybe not being like loved by every person who's seen the video, I have noticed over the past couple of years in my personal life, I've become much better at, giving my opinion on something, like saying what I honestly think. And if someone disagrees or if they're offended or they have feelings about it, it is no longer my impulse to say like, to try to make it better, to try to reframe it, or that's not like actually what they heard. That's not like actually what I meant, because, need everybody to like me, et cetera, et cetera. And like so many things in the Enneagram, there's a paradox in self-actualization the further you go along in your journey, right? Where the more I have learned to let go of that, and it's kind of ironic that, I got that, journey through being like a content creator, because presumably it could have gone in the opposite direction, right? I could have become like incredibly like sycophantic and like, very like careful about how I said everything, but that wasn't the media strategy I chose. I chose to, put myself out there. And I think that's hard for anyone to do, but as you both know, and I'm sure a lot of people watching or listening, it's really hard for a 3, but it is through that practice that, I have, the connections I've made from it have been so worth making, whether it's in business or my personal life. And, the people who have decided that they don't like me, the payoff of really being yourself in a public way like that is, it's like, well, when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror, like, I like who I see, and like I'm okay, with myself when I go to bed at night. And it's like, does it feel good that that person doesn't like me, or that some people don't like me for this reason or that reason? Like, of course not. But at least I have that integrity, and that's been a super awesome practice for the last couple of years. And I'm very thankful too. I think it was just some of the people I met along the way, like different media strategists or other people in the biz who gave me feedback to think about things in this way. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the Enneagram at the time, if I'm being honest. But I'm very, very thankful. And so I think that's a big one in terms of how I think it's helped me be better.
This ad is sponsored by BetterHelp.
February can make it feel like everyone else has their love life figured out. Like they're starring in a rom-com and you're over here improvising with a half-written script and cold coffee. But here's the truth. Whether you're married, dating, single, or happily focused on you, Most of us are still figuring it out, including me. And therapy can be a really practical way to take some pressure off. Get clear on what you want, notice what feels heavy, and figure out what's getting in the way of healthier connection. BetterHelp makes it easier to start. Their therapists are fully licensed in the U.S. and follow a strict code of conduct. They do the matching work up front with a quick questionnaire, and with over 12 years of experience, they usually get it right the first time. And if it's not a fit, you can switch therapists anytime from their tailored recommendations. With over 30,000 therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, it's the largest online therapy platform, and sessions average a 4.9 out of 5 rating from over 1.7 million client reviews. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/typology podcast. That's betterhelp.com/typology podcast.
Hey, this is U.S. Olympic gold medalist Tara Davis Woodhull.
And I'm U.S. Paralympic gold medalist Hunter Woodhull.
As athletes, our lives are about having a clear path.
And a team that you can absolutely trust.
So when it came to getting the best mortgage,
We chose PennyMac.
PennyMac is proud to be the official mortgage provider of Team USA and you.
Learn more at pennymac.com. PennyMac Loan Services, LLC, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID 35953. Licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation under the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Conditions and restrictions may apply.
Yeah, there is an obvious temptation or pitfall for threes who have successful books, successful social media presences, or whatever, right? Who have a public facing life, is that it becomes a platform where you can landscape and curate a false projected image of yourself to win the admiration of the crowd. And in the process, lose touch with your true self and deceive yourself into thinking that who it is that you're portraying to other people is actually who you are, when in reality, it just might be a shtick. And that's what that's the temptation and the danger for threes. And for threes that are really hunting for admiration, which is almost like, for a lot of immature or not so healthy threes, that's like cocaine. The dopamine hit that you get from being loved, when you really, in reality, like I remember someone saying to me once, like, all those people that follow you, they're actually not your friends. Like
Correct.
They actually don't even know who you are at all. And you might not even like to have any of those people in your house for dinner. Do not be too concerned about the things that they say about you. I remember coming across a post one time, maybe it was on Reddit, but I can't remember where it was, or it's on a website somewhere. It says, the name of the article was "Why I Hate Ian Cron."
Oh my God, no, Ian, no. But as a 4, you loved it. You were like, tell me more.
No, ask Anthony. No. How thin? I'm pretty thin-skinned.
Oh, okay.
I take things to heart, but I don't take that sort of stuff to heart anymore. In part because it's like this is a person who lives in a little silver box on my desktop. I have no idea who this person is.
Yeah.
I have no idea what, this is so complicated and silly in some ways. But for threes, it has its own kind of dangers because it kind of feeds into a part of their personality that could be hijacked by the experience of, having a presence in the world of social media.
That's what I wanted to ask. Like you talked about managing the negative comments. How do you manage the admiration?
Ooh, that's a great question. I was recently leading a workshop because obviously as a 3, I'm now empowering other people, other social media journeys, and it's like yet another side hustle or whatever. But I was leading a workshop recently, and one of the things I said to them, I was like, look, it's a skill that you have to learn to not internalize the criticism or the trolling or, I've had people, reach out to my supervisor or my supervisor at the time for my license and stuff. And so of course, none of that's fun or good. And the reason you have to learn that skill is because this isn't when you have a public presence, it's not normal. Like, it's not normal to have this many eyeballs on you. And so you have to develop certain frameworks and practices. But one thing that people do not often ask about is it is also not normal to feel that much positivity and praise. And I know for me, like when I'm going, it depends on what you mean by viral, but when I'm going like viral, like when it's like millions of people are like viewing, and like it's like you can't even keep track of the metrics because so many people are stitching or sequencing your video, and you just kind of watch it go viral, right? That's why it's called that on the internet. The amount of dopamine you feel, I mean, I would almost compare it to something like hypomania, because it's like I sleep less, but like I need less sleep, like, you know, but it's not sustainable because that'll happen for a few days and then I'll crash. You know what I mean? And it's not quite as, for, you know, any practitioners listening, it's not quite as intense as actual hypomania, but I'm also completely like aware of it. Like my insight into it is really great, where it's like, oh, like this feels so good, but it would almost like compare it to, you know, when people consume MDMA, a classic kind of symptom of them like having too much is they're calling up, you know, their mom or their brother or whatever and telling them how much they love them. You know, it's like there's an excess of positive emotion running through, and they have to get rid of it. That's why they're dancing, right? Like at the rave. And so I would kind of compare it to what I imagine like that must be like, because it's a little bit too much. And then to your point, there's also great temptation in that, because the traditional social media strategy then is, okay, people really love this, make another post just like it. You know, make another post just like it. And it's in the biz, people will when they're talking smack about like other talent or other media personalities, they might say, oh, they're just a performance monkey. You know, they don't even like believe what they're saying. Like they just like being on the camera. They like talking. And you know, everyone's going to make a living. There's absolutely no judgment, because I totally get it. But I know that I have to intentionally, some of the things I do is I intentionally like unplug, you know. Or really the best piece of advice that was given to me was you don't keep track of even 1,000 people in your life and what they think of you. So all these commenters, all these viewers, what they think or don't think of you, it's really like none of your business. You know, which is kind of a funny thing to say, because like it is my business, right? But in the sense that like the personalization of it, it actually just doesn't like matter to me in a granular way.
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting you just mentioned MDMA, because I just had this conversation with someone. Speaking of MDMA, I was, you know, I've done a lot of study around the use of hallucinogenics and MDMA around for trauma, for depression, ketamine, things, you know, and because I'm fascinated, right? And because I think it does represent a really interesting set of potential tools that may be, you know, kind of what the Prozac moment was in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, where it was like, whoa, we now finally have something that might be helpful. It might be helpful, right? So I'm open to that possibility. And the research is kind of coming out of, you know, what I would call valid learning centers of learning is really interesting. However, now everybody and their mother has made themselves self-appointed shamans to lead people on these experiences, right, without any training, right, which to me actually is dangerous, right? Like, what if you have somebody that, you know, is predisposed towards schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, and you pop some switch in their brain and off they go, right? Like, you're not qualified to be doing it. And yet people feel like, and what do? They get on the internet, they start selling services, they start selling, you know, experiences. And I'm like, this drives me crazy.
Yeah. The way that you know that we need more research about all that stuff, which I'm super open-minded about, by the way. I am not like anti like any of these more kind of cutting edge therapies at all. But I think, you know, as a practitioner, my official stance on it is that we do have to be, I think, conservative in our approach. And one of the things I like to point out to people is, like, do you notice in all these advertisements and all these podcasts, they all go, oh, well, during the trip or during the high, like, you're more neuroplastic. You're more neuroplastic. It's like, well, these are like 7 different kinds of drugs. Like, we have a dissociative, we have a hallucinogenic, you know, we have an amphetamine, like we have, and like, all of them like make your brain plastic. Like, it just doesn't pass the smell test. And I think that if you take a step back and take the time to like look at it, that's something that I've noticed where like, and hey, maybe some of them, maybe you are in a a temporarily, like hypersuggestible state. But I also know for a fact that people who, and I have gone on different retreats with therapeutic intent. And I don't think that any of these things really work without that integration period.
Right.
And so just like an SSRI, like people, I feel like SSRIs have been in the news lately. The studies say that they're often not effective without psychotherapy. So it's like the idea that their efficacy is questionable is just not new. We've known that for a lot of these things. And in a way, I think that's very encouraging because that means that everybody has a little bit more agency than they feel. And as a 3, that's one of my values. That's very important to me. And it's important to me that other people feel a little bit more of that too.
So 3s are often really good at what I would call maybe self-improvement projects, right? Like optimizing themselves.
Yes.
And how do you tell the difference between genuine inner transformation and simply becoming a more polished version of yourself?
2 things come to mind. I think Ken Wilber has this really great distinction of a state change and a stage change. And so, we were just talking about hallucinogens and different therapies that are coming out. I think a lot of people go to these, retreats or experiences and they experience a chemical state change. And then at the end of their journey, everything's making sense because things are literally making sense again. You're like coming down from
Right.
very disorienting drive. That is a state. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a stage in your development that's changed. I think that when a stage in your development is changed, it's not just about like an analysis or a distinction, but I'm very fond of, who said that? It was like Rumi or like maybe Brene Brown adopted it, but it's kind of like, it's like when you know it in your bones, like when you know it in your body, when it's like when like riding a bike or driving a car, when you have that kind of automatic process with it, I think is when there's a new pattern. There's an additional stage in development. That has always been really important for me to notice. I also think for me, growth is about it's about intentional flexibility. Because I was always, being a 3, who used to think he was a 7. I think 7s are really good at this too. Being flexible is great. Being adaptive is super great. But it's if you don't have any like control over it, that's not so great. And so what I'm often doing with patients in my practice is I'm saying, look, like I'm not here to turn you into someone you're not. So you 2 are 4s. And so maybe, if a moderately healthy or an unhealthy 4 came to see me, they might be more emotional than my other patients, if we're thinking about kind of a textbook presentation. I'm not there to make them like, an unfeeling, logical, like, stuck in their head type person. I want them to be able to go there. I want them to have the option to be intentionally flexible and to be able to go into that when it serves them. And for me, I think 3s maybe get this a little bit more intuitively than other types. Because sometimes people resist that and they're like, well, this makes me feel like inauthentic, And my view on authenticity, and you tell me maybe this is something we can work through together, and it's unbearably 3 of me to say, but I've never really viewed authenticity as a goal in itself. It can be, if my goal is if what I need to be is authentic in this relationship or, on this interview, but it is also a tool. There are times where it would be really inappropriate, and I would even say maladaptive, to be completely like, what does authentic even mean? Like truthful? Am I going to be authentic the same way I am to you, to someone I've known for 20 years, right? What about to a child, right? Or to a work colleague? Like it is okay to let different parts of yourself come out. Again, if it's intentional. I think where a lot of 3s have to learn, and I've certainly am and still learning this in a lot of ways, is you don't necessarily have to when you shift, you don't necessarily have to do it in a way so you are liked and you are valued, in terms of what you think the person wants all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One of the things that this kind of is bringing up for me is the very important distinction between personality and character. And I think people tend to almost either they ignore character as a really important thing, or they conflate the two and it becomes kind of a messy situation. And there really are very different things. Because, and I would actually, like I always said, when my son-in-law came to my house for the first time to ask me to marry my daughter, right? I wasn't interested in whether or not he had a good personality. I could have cared less if he was a 1, a 7, a 9, or a 4, right? Like I was not concerned. I was concerned about his character.
Yeah.
Was this man truthful? Was he honest? Was he loyal? Was he I wouldn't put self-awareness necessarily in the realm of character, but let's just, for the heck of it, throw it there for now. I feel like, and there are even though ones typically want to be good, I know ones who want to be really good frauds. So it doesn't, right?
Yeah. Listen, I lived in Washington, D.C. when I first learned the Enneagram. There are 1s and 3s all over that city. And I don't know, are they doing good? Like TBD.
Right.
Maybe we should loop back. You know what I mean? But they are getting it done, for better or for worse, right? I love that distinction. It was actually something that the therapist I was seeing when I was in grad school said that to me. She said, you can assess, if you know what you're looking for, you can assess somebody's personality within minutes of meeting them, but you can't know their character. Like that takes time, and that's not days of time or even weeks. It's more like months or years. And I think that sometimes, we were talking about what are ways that people kind of, misuse personality frameworks, et cetera. I think it's when they conflate these two things, because I can meet you and I can determine, whether you're like a 4 or a 3 or like whatever, but like I can't know whether you're trustworthy, whether we have the same, values, whether you're dependable, all of these things are inquiries of character that take a lot.
Yeah. I've actually thought about writing a book on character. It's been done a million times, but because I've written about personality, I was like, I actually ought to write about character because it's more important than personality. Like fundamentally, it's more important than actually IQ or personality or any of those measures, right? Like the whole issue of character is just ginormous, and I think it's one that people don't like to talk about as much because maybe it's because it kind of, people who've talked about it in the past do it in a moralistic way or in a way that's that paints character formation in such a light that it seems boring or goody two-shoesy, like it's like, oh no, it's character formation is very, very beautiful when it's undertaken in a way that is intentional and focused. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, hey man, I'm so excited about your book, Babble. Everybody, just dropped in September. I want you to go out and get a copy of this. I think it's a really important book on an important topic. And Joe, how else can people learn about all the different, side hustles that you have, as you put it? Where do they learn about that?
Sure. Well, I am all over different socials. I'm most active on my Instagram page, which is at Joe Nucci Therapy. But you can also find links to everything from the Substack to the YouTube to other upcoming projects at joenuccitherapy.com.
Wonderful. Well, hey, man, thanks for being on. We hope we can get you back.
Yeah, I'd love to anytime.
Great. And everyone listening, as always, may you have love, may you have joy, may you have peace, may you have healing, and may you have rest. See you later.